It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty in his new room, by the way, in his new house. So you can see the new background. I didn't mention it on the Pirate Show. Brand new background for Smitty. The first time he has a new background for me in like nearly 5 years, which is pretty crazy to talk about. But anyway, if you're not watching the show already, where you can see his background over on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, go over there, hit the notification bell, leave a like on the videos. It really helps us out. And also check out the listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Subscribe to us there, leave 5-star reviews. We really appreciate all that. And go check out the description of each and every show where you get to see all of our great sponsors that you're going to hear about throughout this show. This is the Steelers episode. And quite honestly, not a ton going on with the Steelers. If we're being completely honest right now, we're ramping up towards draft time. We are officially in the month of the NFL draft. So later this month, during the first night of the draft, at least the first night of the draft, we will have our draft live show with Smitty, myself, and a bunch of our friends. Going to be live streaming during the draft, talking about the picks, making predictions, going to be having giveaways. It's going to be a good night. So if you want to subscribe to the YouTube, that way you don't miss out, go check it out and hit the notification bell so you get notified when we go live on YouTube over on the first night of the draft. I believe it's April 24th is the first night of the draft. So go check it out there. But yeah, not a ton going on as far as like Steelers news personnel wise and everything, but the quarterback conversation is still an ongoing one. Did we think it was going to take this long for the quarterback conversation? Is it unsurprising to you that we're still having this conversation?
Yes. Once Justin Fields signed with the Jets, no, but I thought Justin Fields was going to re-sign. To be honest, I was a little bit upset with the way that you just threw that right to me, just because I wanted to mess with everybody. I was hoping you really didn't like set the topic up on a tee yet for me, because I was going to say as a joke. So on today's episode, because there wasn't much to talk about, we're going to do a mock draft of a mock draft. So we're going to do a mock draft of how we would go about the draft, but not actually select any players. Anyways, to answer your question, yeah.
To be honest, that's kind of what we did with our mock off season. We talked about the draft.
Yeah,
draft picks we get a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does surprise me just because of the Fields thing. I really thought that he was going to be back, but kind of seeing how clear it is to me that they don't want to impact what they do in 26 by handing somebody the keys for 25 and be like, they very clearly just want a quarterback for 2025. They don't want to invest in 2026 at that position right now. They want to take that swing in the draft. I don't know how it could be more obvious that that's the case of what they want to do. So, but yes, it surprises me that we're still sitting here now having Mason Rudolph. And Mason Rudolph's one of the options to talk about here, or one of the topics, I guess, to talk about here with the main overarching topic of today's show. But I'll be honest, I see a lot of people saying like they just completely botched this offseason at that position and just their whole process in general. I'm probably in the minority on this. I don't think so. Like, I would not have given Justin Fields the guaranteed money that he got from the Jets. And anybody else out there like was not enough of an upgrade. Okay, Geno Smith for a third if they could have been involved with that. But to my knowledge, that was like, and I'm not saying that he's the caliber of player or this magnitude. That basically went down the same way the Luka trade did. Like, Seattle and Vegas did not it's not like Seattle was shopping Geno. Vegas called Seattle, was like, hey, is Geno Smith available? And like that week, Seattle had been trying to extend Geno Smith. They weren't making any progress. So they were like, yeah, we would. And they were like, oh, really? For what? And then it ended up being like they traded a third round pick, because I think the Steelers would have been involved had they known that. That's the one move that like I would have done. Other than that, did not want Russell Wilson back. What other move was out there for them to make?
I mean, Sam Darnold's one that people will point to a lot if they wanted to. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about again. This is not. Sometimes I talk about things that I've heard, and people could hear other things. They can take me for my word. They cannot believe me. I really don't care. But anytime that like I get told something by somebody that's in the business, very close to the organization, and I trust, I think worth talking about. Sam Darnold wanted to be in Pittsburgh. Omar Khan, that was his preference. Artie Smith, that was his preference. Mike Tomlin wanted Sam Darnold, but he didn't want to lie to him. Again, going back to the thing about 2025, like you'll understand what I'm saying here in a second. You look at the way Sam Darnold's contract is structured with Seattle, right? Where it's really like a 1-year deal. Pittsburgh would have done it the exact same way and told him that it was a 1-year deal. They wanted to, like Tom was like, I'm honest with my players. I want to be, which is funny.
Mm-hmm.
Not being, I'm not a Kenny Pickett defender, but kind of funny that he would say I'm honest with my players with the way the Kenny Pickett situation just went down. But anyway, Seattle told Sam Darnold he would be their starting quarterback for at least 2 seasons, even though only 1 year of that was guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
The Steelers were willing to lie to Sam Darnold. They could have given him that same contract with only 1 year actually being guaranteed, but told him it would be 2. Sam Darnold would have been a Pittsburgh Steeler, and he was their preference basically throughout the organization, top to bottom. The only reason that it really didn't come to fruition in my mind is because Tomlin felt the need to be honest and upfront with him, and he wasn't he was like, Seattle's given me assurance I'm the guy for at least 2. You're telling me I'm only assured 1.
Maybe I've been living under a rock, but this is the first time I'm hearing anything along these lines. And I believe you. That's the thing.
No,
I'm not saying I don't believe you. I believe you.
So the person that I had this conversation with, I didn't know this. I literally a week ago last Thursday, had a conversation with this person, and I just became privy to this information. So this is the first episode we recorded where.
So yeah, this is the first time you're telling me, and I believe you, and I believe this guy, and that is going to make so many Steeler fans upset with that knowledge, knowing because look at the situation that we're in, and having Mason Rudolph signed, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world. I feel like people are going to downplay that. Like at least you're getting somebody with experience and is familiar with the organization that they feel comfortable with, and someone that you think you can win some football games with. Like they could be in a worse situation than they were if they didn't get Mason Rudolph too. But obviously still waiting around for Aaron Rodgers. We'll see how that plays out. But if you could have avoided all of this and had Sam Darnold for at least 1 year, that would have probably made a ton of sense for the Steelers from a 2025 competitiveness standpoint and from a fan standpoint, feeling a lot more comfortable about that position in particular. I mean, it's a no-brainer you would feel more comfortable considering the season that he just had in Minnesota. Now, obviously, and maybe I'm in a minority on this, I still think that giving somebody a generous contract based off of 1 year of production is still a risky business to be in. But whenever you have very limited options still at that position, I feel like that's a risk that would have been worth taking. Now, obviously, if they're not going to lie to him, I respect that, but come on, play the game, guys. What are we doing?
Yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying for sure about the risk, but would it really have been? You're talking about 1 year. Again, going back to that, even if it would have been 2, so you're eating 1 year, which isn't great, but if you're going to draft a guy anyway, you're going to have a QB on a rookie contract regardless. So you're tying up $40-ish million in 2 players probably, but at the quarterback position, that's still, compared to what some quarterbacks make, 60,
compared to
anyway,
when you just throw in the need for the Steelers at that position too. That's what makes that pill a lot easier to swallow, I think.
So let's talk about that. Obviously, in my mind, if they would have gone the Sam Darnold route, wouldn't have totally have taken them out of quarterback in 2026, but it could have. Very clearly, their plan is to attack that position, I think, with a massive swing in 2026. Let's talk about how each one of these guys that I'm about to say would do so. But first, let me tell you about Game Changers. What's going on, everybody? Smitty from Around the 412, and I just want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our folks at Game Changers. Their logo on the screen right now, right above my microphone. Over 2,000 different designs in their catalog. Luxury heavyweight material. I'm wearing one of their shirts right now. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Head over to gamechanger.la or pick6.la to pick up some shirts. And guess what? Use code AT412. Save yourself $10 on your order every single time. Again, gamechanger.la or pick6.la. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Check them out. I had to play the ad before talking about the players because I don't think any of the ones we're going to talk about are game changers. So, all right, let's start with Mason Rudolph, who right now, if the Steelers had to play a football game, he would be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Brought in backup money. I mean, $4 million this season. They give him a 2-year contract, so at least you have some guys a placeholder for 2026 as well. But I think that's the correct word to use is placeholder. I think for 2025, he's being used as a placeholder right now for Aaron Rodgers because fully assume that that's going to happen. But also just, okay, let's say Mason Rudolph in some wild scenario where Aaron Rodgers decides to retire, just completely rejects the Steelers and just decides to wait this out. Mason Rudolph is the starting quarterback. That is literally like the Steelers screaming, we are taking quarterback in the first round in 2026. Like that is absolutely, that is when that swing is 100% coming. It's not even like a 99%. And I think that it also sets you up where the Steelers aren't going to try to lose football games, but with what they'd be throwing out there from a product, like I feel like their floor as a football team, just because of what Mike Tomlin offers as a coach as a floor. Again, say what you want about Mike Tomlin from like a roster construction and management perspective. He can coach his ass off. Like he is going to get the most out of this roster regardless of who's on it. So I feel like this is still going to be a 7-win football team regardless of who's quarterback, but that's probably about where I'd say they're going to be with Mason Rudolph is 7 or 8 wins. So not only do I expect that swing at quarterback would come in 2026, but they'd also be picking, I think, a little bit higher if he is the quarterback in 2025.
Yeah, if Mason's the quarterback, like I mentioned a little bit ago, I think that he's a quarterback that you can win games with, and I think we've seen that in the past. I mean, look at how the end of, I guess that would have been the 2023 season played out, right, where Mason starts the last few games, goes into the playoffs, and they still stick with Mason. Was that the right decision or not? We'll never know, but obviously the Steelers felt comfortable enough with Mason to keep him in there. And I think when you look back at what he did in Tennessee, like, was it great? Obviously, no. I mean, he had 5 starts, but was it the worst thing you've ever seen either? Probably not. Well, like you can get serviceable play, like enough play out of Mason Rudolph to win you some football games. I'm not saying he's the reason that he's going to win you those games, but it's kind of a similar situation of what we were talking about with Justin Fields last year to start the season. Obviously, 2 very different players, and I'm not even going to I'm not trying to compare the 2 at all, but just talking about in the general sense of can they provide you enough for this offense to be able to win you some football games? I think that you're talking about very similar situations as far as that goes. In terms of like how you don't know how they're necessarily going to play as a starter, but you think that you can get enough from them. And then if Mason is the starter, obviously a stopgap for 2025, and I don't think that anybody thinks that otherwise. And 2026 would be clear for the quarterback situation, especially and we mentioned this last week on the Steelers show when we were talking about the mock drafts, all of the compensation picks that the Steelers could be stocking up on next season. There could be an opportunity where even if they do finish around the same mark this year of like 10-7, and that would be, I mean, considerably a good year considering what they're going into, at least right now. Now, if they have Aaron Rodgers, that could be different. But if Mason Rudolph's the starter, 10-7, I feel like that would be a very productive year for the Steelers with him as your starter. And if they're able to move up in the draft, which I know going back to what I said in a couple mock drafts that we did, that's very uncharacteristic of what the Steelers have shown in recent history. They just don't, or no, trading down is what I say, but they don't move up that all that often, and they don't move up all that high. Would they be willing to do that, though, if they have a ton of draft compensation that they're beginning from all these free agents that they've lost and all these contracts that have been signed from their free agents? I think that that's going to be the case, and I think that that's going to be the case because of next year's importance of the draft with the quarterback position. So, like, Mason Rudolph being your starter could be good for the long term of this team, just for the simple fact that he's going to be a stopgap player. He's not the future of your franchise. It has no effect on any plans for the draft of that position next year.
I will say the one thing that makes it interesting is, like, if they don't sign Aaron Rodgers and it is Mason Rudolph and we assume he's going to be the starter, does it increase where they could potentially take one in 2025, though? So not 2026, but would it put it more in their mind to take one in 2025? I think that's an interesting conversation to have, which we can have throughout here as we go through the other names here. But the other veteran option to talk about, Aaron Rodgers, who again, I'll say it on here. I've been very confident this is going to happen for a couple weeks now on this show. I will be stunned if Aaron Rodgers does not sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers at some point. When that happens, I don't know, but I will put it at near 100% certainty that Aaron Rodgers is the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback. When have you ever seen Art Rooney II talk with that much confidence about a player that's not on the roster? Like they're just openly acknowledging that he met with them, that he was working out with DK Metcalf, that they said talks have gone well. He's been in constant communication with Tomlin. The concept that I know there's not defense being played. The concept that he is running with DK Metcalf when they're throwing passes together at UCLA is an Arthur Smith staple. Like everything is done besides him signing on the dotted line. And I'll be honest, I legitimately pissed, by the way, if this ends up being that he's announcing this at Pat McAfee's show. I hope to God not. Nothing against Pat or anything like that. But why? Why does this have to be a thing if that's the case? Again, not saying it is, but if it were to be, I hate it. I absolutely hate it. In terms of like the timeline thing, real quick, just to talk about that, because I've seen people talk about like, they're over it each passing day, whatever. The Steelers are idiots. They're being embarrassed or whatever. Why though? Like if they never had any intention of bringing Russell Wilson back and Justin Fields was gone immediately when free agency started, they already have Mason Rudolph in place, which is a better option than anybody that they could have signed in free agency beyond that. Like what's the harm in waiting? Like I understand there needs to be I would say the NFL draft is the time where like you need to know, but like up to this point, it might be like, annoying or whatever. Like I'm a fan too. I've said like, I wish it would happen so it could just be done and over with. And we know for sure what's happening, but it's not from a standpoint of like not understanding why the team is waiting. The team has an offer to him on the table. They're not going to negotiate against themselves. If they were to offer him $30 million as opposed to 25, I'm sure it could be done, but they're not going to negotiate against themselves. There's nobody else at play here right now, unless Aaron wants to continue to try to wait out the Vikings or somebody else's starter getting hurt or something randomly. It's not going to happen. So Aaron Rodgers is going to accept a 1 year off from the Pittsburgh Steelers, probably around $25 million.
Well, not only is there nobody else at play for Aaron Rodgers, but there's also nobody else in play for the Steelers. I mean, realistically, like you mentioned, the point to where a decision should be made is draft night. Now, if you don't have a decision by then your decision gets a little more interesting.
I would move on.
Yeah, you would expect the Steelers at that point to take a quarterback in this draft class. Now, we'll talk about where we think that they should or are going to take one in a little bit, but they'll take a quarterback, and I think that should be the case. But this is not a Brandon Ayuk situation, and I know a lot of people will probably compare it to that, where the Steelers are kind of putting themselves in a limbo, just kind of waiting for something to happen that may not ultimately happen. And while I understand the comparison, I just think that's like apples to oranges a little bit. It's just completely different situations. The Steelers have already signed a free agent in Mason Rudolph, and there's nobody else in free agency that they're going to get. There's no other quarterbacks that they're going to trade for. So Aaron Rodgers is quite literally the only player that they would be bringing in that is not an NFL draft pick. Last year, when you compare it to the Brandon Ayuk situation, you had several wide receivers that the Steelers could have made an attempt to sign from the spring all the way up until training camp, and they did not do that because they were holding out for so long. That is just a completely separate situation because the Steelers had other options. The Steelers don't have other options, and Aaron Rodgers doesn't have other options. The only other option, realistically, that he has is if he just decides to hang him up and retire. And if that's the case, then so be it. But their only other option right now is coming from an NFL draft pick, which is why I don't mind waiting either. I just don't think that it really makes sense to complain about waiting around when you know that that's the only case. That's the only guy that's going to be brought in that you can realistically bring in. It's nobody else, and he has nowhere else to go. So I don't see why people have an issue with waiting.
You said, so do you think if Aaron Rodgers signs, they don't draft a quarterback?
No, I just think that if he doesn't sign, then they're definitely drafting one, and it'll just depend on where they draft one. I still think that if Aaron Rodgers is signed, that they probably will draft a quarterback, but I don't think that you're necessarily signing somebody Like I think that they could draft a quarterback as a potential like Skylar Thompson replacement as QB3. If you're drafting a quarterback this year, like without Aaron Rodgers, you kind of have to decide whether you're drafting a quarterback to be your QB2 behind Mason or your QB3 behind Skylar Thompson.
Oh,
and
I thought you were saying you're going to say compete with Rudolph.
well,
even.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I guess you should realistically say that, because if they did decide to draft one, like we both very much disagree with, but if they drafted a quarterback in the first round, in all seriousness, that would be, I guess, a competition with Mason Rudolph. I don't think there's anybody in the draft that is going to win out a job at the level that the Steelers would be taking in this year's draft. So that's why I said, like, would they be like the QB3 or QB2? I don't even think that they're necessarily going to compete with QB1 if that's the case with Mason Rudolph, just because I don't think any of these guys would win the job. But but yes, I guess technically they would compete with Mason Rudolph if they're drafted high enough. I still think that they're going to draft one if they do sign Aaron Rodgers, but it just makes it more prudent if they don't.
It would be, I would go on the record saying this if it comes to fruition and I'm wrong, freezing cold takes me, old takes exposed, whatever. They're not drafting a quarterback in the first round, but 0%. Everything that they've done, as we've talked about, has been about them being able to take the swing in 2026. Why in the world would they then all of a sudden take a quarterback in the first round of 2025 and then block themselves, like completely switch paths and just totally pivot and change course on how they've been operating to then take a quarterback in the first round of 2025? It would make no sense to me if they were to do that. But for the sake of having that conversation, the one that I don't even see, because we can talk about this too. The one that people have been putting into mock drafts for them will probably be available. Well, I shouldn't say probably, could potentially be available, is Jaxson Dart at pick 21, which to me, Alan and I just talked about this. We were asked, what's the worst case scenario at pick 21? To me, it's Jaxson Dart. One, because I don't think he's very good. Two, because it blocks the future, in my opinion, of taking a quarterback in 26. So to me, worst case scenario at 21 is taking Jaxson Dart. This entire thing was about how it would impact 2025 in the future. Jaxson Dart impacts both of those, in my opinion. If you take a quarterback in the first round, Mason Rudolph might start a handful of games. You're going to eventually turn the keys over this year to Jaxson Dart. And not only this year, you're going to give him at least 2026 to show something as well. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about at least 2 years of investment. Scenario. Yeah. You're talking about 2 years of investment into this quarterback, which I don't feel good about. You mentioned Kenny Pickett. I think Jaxson Dart's a better prospect than Kenny Pickett was. But I see the similarity that I see is you're taking a quarterback in a very weak draft class just because you feel like you need a quarterback, in my opinion. There's no scenario in my mind that could possibly happen where he's the best prospect on the board for them. If he was, then so be it. I don't see that. Like, all the defensive tackles would have to be gone. Ibuka and Burden would have to be gone, assuming Golden would be gone too. The corners, like, there's a lot of corners that would take over him. Yeah, like I don't know the scenario that I would have to have play out for me to be able to talk myself into Jaxson Dart, which I wanted to be a Jaxson Dart guy. Like, eye test aesthetically, he passes that test. Then you turn on the tape and watch him, and it's just like, man, playing in a very gimmicky offense at Ole Miss where they just create a bunch of one-on-ones on the outside, RPO heavy, never really has to make reads because it's just the one read and throw. Don't think the arm strength is there. The ball hangs in the air forever. People talk about how far he can throw the ball. Yeah, well, it's like an arm punt every single time, the way that it hangs up in the air. He's a tough dude. I'll give him credit. Like, I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's a good enough athlete, and he'll certainly try to run guys over. I think he's a tough guy. I think that there's so many question marks for me about him. And the other thing is, and this isn't a reason to draft or not draft a guy, because it's more about the organization than it is the player at this point. I don't trust the Steelers to be the team to develop him proper. Like, if he goes to LA with the Rams at 26 to sit behind and then take over for Stafford, I think that could work. If he were to go, Minnesota's obviously not going to take a quarterback, but Minnesota, it could work. San Fran, if they were like, you know what, we're not paying Brock Purdy, we're going to moneyball this. We don't want to invest $60 million in the quarterback position. There are certain schemes where I think it could work out really, really well for Jaxson Dart. But I think the most likely scenario is he's like a fringe top 20 quarterback in the NFL, which, again, that's not something that I'm chasing with a first-round pick.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Going to his actual gameplay of why I wouldn't draft him, I agree with everything that you mentioned there, where I think he's a slow decision maker in Ole Miss's offense. Didn't really have to make decisions. And like you called it gimmicky. Like, yeah, it's a really easy offense to operate in as a quarterback. So I understand completely why there would be a lot of struggles at the NFL level. Like the game is not going to slow down at all
the speed of the
you're
game,
making the jump. It's going to be tough for him to be able to catch up. And so as much as, and I agree, I wanted to be a Jaxson Dart guy. I've been a Jaxson Dart fan for the last 4 or 5 years before people even knew who this guy was, as far as like NFL draft and football on this level goes, because he played at Corner Canyon High School in Utah. I wanted him to go to BYU, ends up going to USC his freshman year, transfer portal. And when he was in the transfer portal, I was pushing for him to go to BYU then too. So like I have been on the Jaxson Dart train for a very, very, very long time. I've liked this kid for a long time, but for the Steelers, for the NFL and in the first round, absolutely not. Now, if this was a case where they get to the third round and Jaxson Dart was there and they took him with their third round pick, like obviously, do I think that he's going to be the eventual starter if I think he has these technical issues, depending on whether he's in the first round or third round? Probably not. Like I don't think it matters where he's drafted. I still think he's going to have those issues at the NFL. But like, is that pill easier to swallow if he's a third round pick as opposed to your first round pick? Absolutely. I'd be more okay with it then. But obviously, I don't want to get to that scenario. I just don't even think that they're going to play those games. I think he'd be gone anyway by the time the third round rolls around. But
I mean, have you seen what Mel Kiper's said?
No.
About him? Mel Kiper put him at 9 to the Saints, and he said he's not coming off of that in any of his future. He is staying with that to draft day because he had Bo Nix to the Broncos last year at 12, which is what happened, but he got talked out of it before the draft and didn't end up having that in his final one. He said it's not happening this year. He's sticking with Jaxson Dart at 9 to the Saints.
Well, instead of a Mel Kiper pick, that would be a mid Kiper pick. Because
although, hey, good for the Steelers, at least 3 QBs before 21.
If there's multiple QBs gone, that's good for the Steelers as far as what the board could look like. But Jaxson Dart, as much as I like the kid, I like him, like his swagger and everything about him, like you mentioned, like aesthetically, he fits the bill. He's what you'd want the quarterback to be like. But as you mentioned, as soon as you turn on the tape at the NFL level, I just don't see it. I know there's a ton of connection. What I don't think is realistic connection, but it's a ton of connection that's going to be to the Steelers. I just don't see it.
I don't think the Steelers like him. And that's funny to say about a player that's coming in for a top 30, but we can let's use this as an example. I'm not going to go to.
We're going to mention, by the way, that you said he's not going to be on a 30 last week.
Yeah, I know. But then okay. So I talked with Alan about that. Like, had a full conversation after we recorded because I was like, "Am I an idiot?" Because I want to know what you have been hearing from people within the organization. If it matches what I'm hearing, and then why would they still bring him in for a top 30 if you are hearing the same things? And he's heard the same things. The Steelers are not that high on Jaxson Dart, but they're not high on everybody that they bring in for a top 30. Like, do they want team? Like, they'll use these as smoke screens at times. Not to say there's no level of interest, but there's times where they'll appear to show more interest in a player and seem higher on a player for that purpose. So I'm going to believe what I've heard from multiple. Like, I have 3 screenshots of texts saying the Steelers do not like Jaxson Dart. None of them are from the same person. So I'm going to continue to believe they're not that high on him and that they're higher on like 5 different quarterbacks in this class over Jaxson Dart. And it's not a good draft class of quarterback, just to show you how they feel about Jaxson Dart. So I understand he's coming in for a top 30. I'm sticking to my guns on this. While we might have evidence, and also if they were that high on him, I understand that like they had some presence at Ole Miss Pro Day. No Khan or Tomlin. They're not using a first round pick on a quarterback and like strapping the rocket to the guys to franchise. For some other position, I get that like they weren't at Fatanu. Maybe they will have not been at this year's first round pick if it is Kenneth Grant, because that's the day they were meeting with Rodgers. But quarterback specifically, whole different ball game. Those two would have been there for a quarterback you're taking in the first round.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought you were going to say, or I thought you were going to joke and say that you wanted to see if they brought him in just to like, do we actually like this guy? Because I feel like so many people, and I brought this up last week, so many people are talking about Dart to the Steelers, and I feel like none of it is coming from the Steelers. Like no interest is actually coming from the Steelers, like as you mentioned, and it's all just coming from external factors. And so it's like, did the Steelers just bring him in for a 30 visit where it's like, are we like being manipulated into thinking that we actually like him?
Are we being gaslit into picking Jaxson Dart?
Yeah, are we being gaslit into picking Jaxson Dart? No, that's a good point.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that there's like 4 to 5 quarterbacks that they would be higher on. Are we talking about 2 of them? Are both of the guys that we're going to mention higher on their list?
Yeah. And then the 2 obvious ones, and then there's one more that we can bring up towards the end too. But let's talk about Jalen Milroe first, as soon as I tell you guys about Keats Barbershop. Smitty from Around the 412 here, and while I may not have much hair, the hair that I do have will not be cut by anybody besides Keat at Keats Barbershop. My friend Christian Circle, been with us since day one. Keats Barbershop, located 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Download the app The Cut. Book an appointment with Christian today, or you can do walk-in with Tony or Ashley. But again, Keats Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Go check them out. Old school vibe in there. Absolutely love it. Cannot recommend them enough. Wouldn't go anywhere else. Maybe I'll see you there. Jalen Milroe is definitely one of those guys. That's high. I think the Steelers are higher on him than a lot of people. Enough to do it at 21? Don't think so. Just talked about why I feel like I don't think they're going to take a quarterback at 21. I think they're doing their homework on him, and there's a way things could fall where like maybe it is more realistic than I'm giving credence to. But it's weird because I think he's going to go, like if they had a second round pick, I think that's potentially a dart worth throwing. No pun intended. But they don't. And I think he's going to go in between their first 2 picks. So it's kind of tough. That to me, his upside is a swing worth taking. But again, how does it impact 26? I think it does. This is a guy that you know is a project. If you love Jalen Milroe, you love Jalen Milroe because of the athleticism and what he can do with his legs right now, and what you think you can develop into as a passer. Because it's not there right now. Wildly inaccurate. However you feel about Justin Fields as a passer, Justin Fields is probably right now 5 times the passer that Jalen Milroe is. But you're banking on upside and believing that your coaching staff is the one to get the most out of him. Now, I don't have that belief in the Steelers coaching staff, but like if they didn't, they wouldn't have the coaching staff they do. So obviously they don't feel the same way about it. Milroe has the tools, and there's a lot of concepts that he runs better than anybody else in the class. If Matt Canada was still the offensive coordinator, first off, I would hate my life. But with how much they run Hank, Jalen Milroe might be the best quarterback in terms of running Hank that's coming out this year, like including Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. So I could see why you would buy into Jalen Milroe. Unlike buying into Jaxson Dart, I think it makes sense because you're chasing the upside. You've seen teams have success, obviously, with the Philadelphia Eagles winning the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. You're trying to talk yourself into Jalen Milroe becoming Jalen Hurts, and I get that. I like Milroe. He's my QB3 of this class, right behind Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Well, I shouldn't say right behind. There's a gap there, but I'm saying he's QB3 in the class for me because I think I'm always the guy that's going to want to take those swings. And there's upside for me here to tap into, whereas with Dart, I don't think the floor is there. I also don't think the upside's that great. So I don't think that's one worth taking. With Milroe, you could absolutely talk me into it, assuming you have the right structure in place for him to grow, and I feel like the coaching staff can get the most out of him.
I actually agree with you. So I'm not big on Milroe just as a player to plug into the NFL right now. Now, the athleticism obviously speaks for itself. You're basically like everybody jokes about how like Lamar Jackson was a running back playing quarterback. You are more realistically.
I don't know if this is a joke.
Yeah, that's what I would say. This is a more realistic option for that scenario in Milroe being a running back playing quarterback. But the traits are there that make you intrigued about it. But obviously, don't want to do that at 21. But I also don't know. So if you draft Dart, expecting on where you draft Dart, you would think that takes them out of quarterback in 2026. If they did that with Milroe, I don't necessarily feel the same way that I do as with Dart, that it would take them out of quarterback in 2026 just because of how much a project he actually would be. Not to say that Dart's not just as much of a project. I just think that the projects are two completely different things.
So are you still saying 21 is used on Milroe?
No, just in Milroe being drafted. Like if he were to get drafted by the Steelers. Not
the thing is though, like,
just because I don't think Milroe's going to go that high. Like I think he's going to go high. I think he's going to go higher than where the Steelers are going to be able to take him, but I don't think that he is going to go at like in the top 25.
My prediction is somebody trades into 31 or 32 to take him into the 5th year option. Could be Cleveland just moving up a little bit to make sure that they get the 5th year option if they take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter at 2. I think that certainly makes a lot of sense. But yes, I guess the thing for me is like if you're taking him, he's a project and that he's further away and he's probably not going to play in 2025. So like that to me is why it would impact 26. Like I think Dart and him both impact 26 because if you're taking him, you're not playing him in 25. Well, he's got to play in 26. Like, you obviously got to see him at some point. I guess the justification would be if it's not day 1, if it's not even round 2, if you take him with a 3rd round pick and all he ends up being is your backup quarterback, like there's plenty of backup quarterbacks, obviously, and that's not a great investment, especially when you don't have a 2nd round pick, but it's more justifiable than obviously if you did at 21. If they take him at 21, they're not investing again in 26 in my mind. Like regardless, insert player, they're not doing it again. I just think if you like Milroe enough to take him on day 2, with as much of a project as he is, that 26 is probably going to be his first time to start. So I still don't think that they would, in the case of Milroe, also invest again in 26.
Can I ask a genuine question about Milroe? And this is slightly different. It's not necessarily Steelers related. It's more specific to Milroe. Maybe I'm just stupid, and that's probably the case. But what is the drastic differences between Jalen Milroe and Anthony Richardson that made Richardson a top 5 pick and Milroe you don't want to take in the 1st round?
I mean,
because to me, I think that they are very similar. Like they're very similar players. Richardson may have had a better or like a more accurate arm coming out of college than Milroe has, but I don't really see a ton of differences as far as like the player type goes, the build, what you get out of them, how much of a project they could be. But one was a top 5 pick and the other we don't want to take in the 1st round.
I don't think that it's worth necessarily, 4th overall as opposed to where Milroe's going to end up going. And this is coming from somebody that was a huge Anthony Richardson fan and said, I thought the Colts were justified taking him 4th overall because of the specimen that he was. Milroe, obviously not quite as big. I think Richardson's 6'4", Milroe 6'2", but runs like a tank. I mean, he's built like a house. Jalen Milroe, very physically impressive, obviously, as is Anthony Richardson. I think the one thing for me, and people didn't give Anthony Richardson enough credit for it, is while the arm was wildly inaccurate, it's not because of where he decision making. Like he knew where he wanted to go with the football. He just wasn't able to put the football there. Like his arm could not do what his mind knew that he wanted to do. I think he was an underrated processor, like in his time at Florida, especially for a guy that didn't start a lot of college football games. So I think that to me is probably the one difference. The inaccuracy is definitely like both of them, certainly parallel. Milroe obviously I think he has a little bit more experience in terms of running different concepts and stuff like that than Richardson did. I don't think it's like an entire round difference. Like that's why I think Milroe's going to go in round 1.
Yeah.
I think somebody's going to talk themselves into wanting the 5th-year option on him. So, especially if you're thinking he's probably not going to play in year 1, so you're still getting hopefully 4 years of him as a starter. No, you want him to be a starter for way longer than that. So, but like on a rookie contract.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, like I said, it's nothing really to do with the Steelers. I never quite understood what the difference was. Like how big of a difference is based off of where those two are going to be drafted, or where I guess Richardson was drafted versus what Milroe's
I've never
going to be drafted.
I know that I've seen Milroe just like try to throw for the longest distance, like just totally uncork one. We know Richardson can throw the entire length of a football field, like has the arm strength to do it. Now, where it's going to land, is he going to hit whatever target he's trying to hit? Probably not.
Going to go out of bounds or
yeah. But I don't know. I agree. I think Milroe should probably be talked about like the same as, especially in this class. Like Anthony Richardson, if he was in this class, based off the way that he was looked at that year, is probably going number 1. So right. I don't know. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are both going to go, obviously, before Jalen Milroe, Jaxson Dart, any of these guys. Let's wrap up. Let's talk about the quarterback that I feel like is the most likely to become a Pittsburgh Steeler out of this class. That's a statement I'm willing to say. I think the Steelers are going to draft a quarterback this year. The most likely one that they would draft, in my opinion, is Will Howard out of Ohio State. I know for a fact they love him. He was fantastic at the pro day after not being all that great at the combine. But obviously, like sample size, not that large, obviously, for this. But if you could just take any quarterback this past year and pick out a 4-game sample size, Will Howard had the best body of work in terms of that. Like if he just had his college football playoff to stack up with anybody's 4-game sample size, Will Howard played the best 4-game stretch of anybody coming out of this year. But the problem is, before that, he did not look like a guy that should even be coming into the draft. Especially like against Penn State. First game against Oregon, not very good. But I think that it's easy, especially for the Steelers, to say that's Ryan Tannehill for Arthur Smith right there. That's Mason Rudolph on a rookie contract. So I don't know that they are looking at Howard as somebody that they know for sure can be a starter. I just think they are kind of going to be like looking to replenish the cabinet, if you will, in terms of the quarterback room. And they don't want to keep signing quarterbacks and paying them, like Mason Rudolph again, $4 million for a back quarterback isn't a lot. But just last year, paying 3 veterans as opposed to having a rookie. They haven't had a rookie quarterback in that room in quite some time. I think they want to get at least one in there. So is Will Howard going to become the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers? I mean, possibly, but I think unlikely. But to me, even if he just ended up being like their long-term backup or whatever, the next Mason Rudolph, I think they would look at that as a win.
It's hard to argue with that logic. Obviously, the connection to Will Howard is strong, and I also listened to Steelers Afternoon Drive. What was it on Friday? And Allen also said you had him pick a quarterback in this draft class, and he picked Will Howard as well. That would become a Steeler. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I agree with you. His college football playoff performance was great. 75% accuracy over those 4 games. I think it was like over 1,100 yards in those games, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. The question I would have is, and I hear what you're saying, how like obviously you're replenishing the quarterback room. Does Will Howard, was he different? Because we're not expecting Will Howard to be taken higher like we are with a Milroe or a Dart. If Will Howard is taken in the probably as high as 3rd, if not maybe even 4th round, depending on what the board shapes out to be by the Steelers, how does that affect your outlook for 2026 still with quarterback? Because we talked about the other guys, how that's definitely affected, but does taking a mid-round pick on a guy like him really change their plans for 2026?
No, I don't think so. I mean, especially let's look at this from both perspectives. Start with the one without Aaron Rodgers. Very good chance Will Howard would play this year at some point. So you get a look at him instead of Mason Rudolph. But depending on what he shows, could he prevent them from taking quarterback in 26. I guess the possibility's there. I wouldn't bet on that happening. Like, again, are they going to completely change course on how they've set this up to be able to attack 26 just because a little bit of a sample size? I don't necessarily think so. And if they draft Aaron Rodgers, now he's done like leap 2 guys to even see the field, Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph to see the field. How much is he going to play? And then, like, I just think that you look at it again, like, when you invest a mid-round pick, like, look at what they did with Mason Rudolph, right? They spent a 3rd-round pick on him, and if Ben didn't get hurt, it's not like he would have seen much time at all on that rookie. Like, they spent a 3rd-round pick on a guy that maybe he was or maybe he wasn't. I think that'd be the same thing as Will Howard. Like, maybe he plays. They don't necessarily even need to give him an extended look, but if he does, he plays good. Maybe he does change your plans, but more likely than not, he doesn't. So I would once again just be looking at this as like the 2018 draft all over, drafting Mason Rudolph.
I think that's actually a really good scenario. And I agree with you. I don't think that Will Howard would really change your future plans. Or now, if he sees the field in a fluky scenario like you saw in 2019 with Mason Rudolph, and he actually plays well, no, maybe you change your mind. But odds are we're not going to see something like that happen. So I think that you're going to see a change of plans at quarterback in 2026. And I don't think that Will Howard would affect that. And quite frankly, you want some consistency with your quarterback room at some point. This is back-to-back years that the Steelers are going into the season with a complete overturn of their quarterback room. I would love to know in recent history how often that has happened with any franchise. Like, you've gone back-to-back seasons where your quarterback room entering the season is going to be completely new to you. If you're able to bring in a guy like Will Howard in that mid-round and still draft another one next year, that's at least somebody who you know is going to be around that is consistent from the year prior, and then they figure out who the third quarterback's going to be. I think that would be a smart pick. Sounds like it's going to be a likely pick. I think, honestly, ideal scenario for me, trade down a little bit from 83, recoup something in maybe like the early to mid 90s, and then pick up something in the early 100s, and maybe one of those picks ends up being Will Howard.
I actually like that better than what I was going to say, because I was say I think they would have to move up from their round 4 pick, but I like the idea of trading back from 83 more as opposed to doing that. So I'm fine with it. Honestly, on that topic, I think as we sit here right now, the draft, by the time you're watching this, is less than 3 weeks away. I think the most likely scenario for the Steelers is trading down in round 1.
Man, I'd be shocked.
I think I've
said it so many times that they've never done it, and that's why I just don't think they're going to do it. Whenever we do mock drafts, I never want to do it just because it never happens. If they do it, I'd be shocked.
I think they have like 7 guys that they like equally, pretty much. Kenneth Brandt, Derek Harmon, Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, Walter Nolan, Jahdae Barron. I think that they would be fine with any of those guys right now. That's like the list for their first round pick. They don't like them all equally, but they're in enough of a bucket to me, similarly, where they would be willing to move down as long as they got one of them. The right player is going to have to be there for somebody to move up for. It'd be hilarious. What if it's for Jaxson Dart? Like the Rams moving from 26 to 21 to secure Jaxson Dart, to have him at the year after Matthew Stafford or whatever they want to do. I'm throwing that scenario out there because I'd love to see it happen. I think the best case scenario for the Steelers is trading back. Just from the vibes I'm getting, I think that they want to. I think they have the 3rd fewest draft picks this year, something like that. They would love to recoup a day 2 pick. Not to say that they definitely don't have buyer's remorse on the DK Metcalf deal, but they would like to have another day 2 pick.
Like I said, I'd be shocked if it happened. Not because I don't believe that it can happen. It's just we've never really seen it in recent history. So that'd be interesting. It'd be cool to see the Steelers continue to change their ways from what they were. I mean, we've seen that a lot recently, but continuing to change in those ways. You mentioned there was one more quarterback that you were going to bring up.
Oh yeah.
That I'm curious to hear who it is. Quinn Ewers.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a serious interest in him?
I don't know about. I would probably put it in the same thing as like Jaxson Dart. Obviously not as a first rounder, but in terms of like people trying to make the connection there. I mean, obviously the pedigree is there for him, what he was going into college, and he certainly had his moments. Actually, another one we should probably talk about is Tyler Shuck. Like really anybody that's going to go within the first 3-4 rounds of this class is probably worth bringing up. Shuck was in here for the top 30. He's been mocked as high as like 33 to the Browns, first pick of round 2. I don't. I like Shuck's arm. I think he does some intriguing things, and he's a smart dude. He's played in like 8 different offenses. But the injuries, man, the injuries are a bigger concern for me than his age. Like everybody points to the fact he could be a 26-year-old rookie or whatever like that. Well, it's because of the injuries, and the injuries to me are far more concerning than his age, because I don't necessarily care if he's starting his NFL career in the prime of his career in terms of his age. Like that to me wouldn't be a deal breaker, especially when you're hoping to get, 10 years or so out of a franchise quarterback. But more so the injuries. With Ewers, I think there's some level of interest there, but I don't think, at least right now, enough for me to take super seriously. And I think the few times that they've gotten eyes on him, he hasn't impressed. So I think he would have to slide more than I think he's going to slide. I think he's going to go either compensatory pick day in round 3 or at some point in round 4. I think the Steelers wouldn't even start thinking about it until round 5. So I guess if they miss out on Howard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It'll be interesting to see. I'm very curious how this draft is going to play out for them at the quarterback position, because like we mentioned, we both think they're going to draft one. It'll just depend on when. And obviously, Aaron Rodgers, his decision is going to play into when they would take a quarterback as well and who it could be. I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. Like you mentioned, we're only like 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. So let us know in the comments below, who of the draftees would you be interested in drafting? Would you want Jaxson Dart? Would you wait on Will Howard? Or do you not want any of these guys? Let us know in the comments. Let us know if you want Aaron Rodgers. Let us know how you feel about rolling into the season with Mason Rudolph as a starter as well. Do you guys feel comfortable with that? I'm curious to see what you guys think.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts, questions for a future episode, of course, any of that good stuff. If you're listening somewhere else, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe over there. Just search around the 412. We're over there on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever your podcast from. You can even leave us a question in the reviews. I look at them all the time, see if you guys are dropping us questions within there to bring up on the show. So we appreciate that. Whether you are watching or listening, in the description of the show, you'll see a bunch of links. One of those above Tyler right now, Marcello Electric, Brandon Marcello, a.k.a. Boots, our friend, his small business serving in Beaver, Butler, Lawrence, and Allegheny County. Give him a call, 724-614-0611. Or, again, in the link, we'll go right to his Facebook page. All his work's there, his phone number's there, his email's there, however you want to reach out to him. Again, Marcello Electric, 724-614-0611. We already talked about Game Changers. Save yourself $10 using code AT412 at checkout. Just came out with a DK Metcalf shirt. Probably going to have to give one of those away. Certainly we'll be giving one of those away on draft night, but even maybe other than that, maybe we'll have to do so because it's a sick design. And then Keith's Barbershop, of course, and then Everything Custom Designs, our friend Haley Wagner's small business as well. T-shirts, hoodies, long sleeves, glass tumblers, bunch of stuff, whether it's our merch, your own stuff, whatever you want to do, hit her up as well. Facebook link down below. For Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Around the 412 Steelers show. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.